On to questions D and E. I think we're at like part 4 in the videos, but nonetheless, we're on to D and E of question 2 are still asking for solving all values, not just from 0 to 2 pi. So these are the ones where we're taking the numbers. First goal is getting the trig function by itself. And then once we take the trig inverse, we want to make sure to immediately add that plus 2 pi n for sine, cosine, or plus pi n for tangent. So first thing we're going to do here is on this problem, we got to divide by 6 on both sides. So that actually looks like sine. I'm going to try and create myself some room here. So sine of x plus 5 pi over 6 is equal to, well, if you take negative 3 and divide it by 6, that's just negative a half. So negative a half and the square root of 2, that gives us negative square root 2 over 2. Excuse me. And so we have our sine function. Sorry, that looks like a 5. Sine of x plus 5 pi over 6 is by itself set equal to negative square root 2 over 2. Now we can take the trig inverse or sine inverse of both sides. So if we take the sine inverse of sine of x plus 5 pi over 6, we just get the x plus 5 pi over 6. That is equal to the sine inverse of the negative square root 2 over 2. So we're asking ourselves, where does sine, what angle is sine equal to negative square root 2 over 2? In terms of our quadrants, here sine is negative here and here. Square root 2 over 2 refers to 45-degree angles. So our answers are x plus 5 pi over 6 equals, well, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 5 pi over 4. Immediately plus 2 pi n. But we know that there's another answer, x plus 5 pi over 6 over here, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 pi over 4. Again, immediately plus 2 pi n. So our answers are close. We're about done. We've got x almost by itself, but we have to subtract 5 pi over 6 from both sides. So x equals 5 pi over 4 minus 5 pi over 6 plus 2 pi n. And it also equals 7 pi over 4 minus 5 pi over 6 plus 2 pi n. So now we need to find our common denominator. So common denominator between 4 and 6 is 12. So that means we took that times 3, so that's really 15 pi over 12. And that 12 becomes 10, 6, 5, 10. Okay, perfect. So our 4 times 3, 5 times 3, 6 times 2 to 12, 5 times 2 to 10. So one of our answers is x equals, so 15 pi over 12 minus 10, that's 5 pi over 12 plus 2 pi n. And here we took times 3 to get 12, so that's 21 times 2 to get 12, still a 10. And that's 11 pi 12. So we would box in these two answers here. Right, so a lot of times when you have these subtraction, like you have to subtract your 5 pi over 6, unfortunately a lot of times your denominators are not the same, so you just have to pick that common denominator. So just be careful that you don't lose a subtraction sign, or make sure you add when you're supposed to add and subtract when you're supposed to subtract. But let's see, I'm going to pause the video for a second. I'm going to actually erase some of my work here just so I have room to work for part E. So just bear with me for a minute. I will erase part of this. We have room. Bam, just like that, magic. We got all of our part D erased, so I have room to work for E. With E, we'll jump right in. We've got, let's see, we need to get cosine by itself. There we go. To get cosine by itself, we need to first add 3 to both sides. So if you add 3, it looks like this, we say plus 3, plus 3. So we get 1 equals 2 cosine x over 2. Then we divide by 2 on both sides. And we get cosine, so half is equal to cosine of x over 2. So we're going to take the cosine inverse, and we find cosine inverse of a half is set equal to x over 2. Erase this dot. So where does cosine, what angle, gives us cosine of a half? Well, we know that cosine inverse half, that's at, well, I'm gonna flip this around. So I'm gonna say x over 2 equals, and then the cosine inverse. So I'm just flipping that. But let's add pi over 3. Immediately plus 2 pi n. Okay. We also know that x over 2 is, well, let's see, cosine's positive here in the first quadrant, pi over 3, but we're also clear over at the fourth quadrant, right? If I were to draw this over here, cosine's positive here and here. So if we were at pi over 3, we need to go clear around to the fourth quadrant, and that is 5 pi over 3. And then, of course, plus 2 pi n. And we got one last step. In that last step, we have to multiply both sides by 2. So we're going to multiply by 2. But the thing is, the whole thing has to get multiplied by 2. Right? So what we find is x is equal to, well, let's see, 2 pi over 3 plus 4 pi n. Or x is equal to, well, 2 times, that's 10/3, 10 pi over 3 plus 4 pi n. Let's see, yep, box that in, and there's our answer. So, done solving. So I'll do the next section in a new video, but that is all of our solving.